If you have a Bible and you find it helpful, please turn it to Acts, the 8th chapter. This is where we will spend our time today. Paul has left Athens and he's headed for Corinth. And Corinth is a very interesting city, Acts chapter 18. It's a huge cosmopolitan mishmash of all kinds of cultures, all races. And the reason for that is where it's located. If you go and get yourself a map of the ancient world, you'll find that Greece is divided into two land masses. And those land masses are connected at Corinth by this little 4 or 5 mile wide strip of land. And because of that little strip of land in Corinth being located there, all of the trade that took place in this region of the world passing through Greece from both two seas and the land passed through Corinth. So it's like for any of us here, Valdosta in my lifetime has quadrupled in its size. Why? I-75 goes through there. It changes the culture when you've got that kind of commercial traffic coming through. We know when Paul was here because we know a lot about the Roman Empire with regard to the proconsul that you'll see mentioned in the text, Gallio. We know exactly when Gallio was the proconsul of this region, 51 to 53 AD. So we know that when Paul encounters him, we know exactly the timeline. Claudius had expelled the Jews from Rome 2 years prior in 49, and so we meet Priscilla and Aquila here, who have been expelled. Let's look at the text. I'll begin reading in verse 1. 18. That's my wife asking that question, by the way, if you're curious. After this, Paul left Athens and went to Corinth. There he met a Jew named Aquila, a native from Pontus, who had recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla because Claudius had ordered all the Jews to leave Rome. Paul went to see them, and because he was a tent maker as they were, he stayed with them and worked with them. Every Sabbath, he went into the synagogue and tried to persuade both Jews and believing Greeks. When Silas and Timothy came from Macedonia, Paul devoted himself exclusively to preaching, testifying to the Jews that Jesus was the Christ. But when the Jews opposed Paul and became abusive, he shook out his clothes in protest and said to them, "Your blood be on your own heads. I am clear of my responsibility. From now on, I will go to the Gentiles." Then Paul left the synagogue and went next door to the house of Titius Justus, a worshiper of God, and Crispus, the synagogue ruler, and his entire household believed in the Lord. And many of the Corinthians who heard him were believing and were baptized. One night the Lord spoke to Paul in a vision and said, "Don't be afraid. Keep on speaking. Do not be silent. I am with you. No one is going to attack you to harm you because I have many people in this city." So Paul stayed for 18 months teaching them about the Word of God. While Gallio was proconsul of Achaia, the Jews made a united attack on Paul and brought him into court. This man they charged is persuading the people to worship God in ways contrary to the law. Just as Paul was about to speak, Gallio said to the Jews, "If you Jews were making a complaint about some misdemeanor or a serious crime, I would listen to you. But since it involves questions about words and names in your own law, settle the matter yourselves. I will not be a judge of such things." So Gallio had them ejected from the court. They all turned on Sosthenes, the synagogue ruler, and beat him in front of the court. But Gallio showed no concern for it whatsoever. Now, this little sentence that this text starts with is a trip on foot of 50 miles. And the Bible does that a lot. You see these small little sentences that describe something that's really big. I mean, if somebody told you to walk to Valdosta today, or me to walk to Valdosta, I think that would be significant to us. But this is what Paul and these do. They walk to Corinth from where they are, and it's a 50-mile walk composed in just one little sentence. They come to Corinth, which, as I described before, sits on this little isthmus of land. You've got two seas, the Adriatic and the Aegean. They're connected at this little piece of land. So you've got seafaring trade coming from two oceans to this one spot. You've got land trade going in both directions coming to this one spot. And so all of this trade coming through this city, well, what you wind up with is an incredibly cosmopolitan city filled with all kinds of people. Well, when you get that much commerce in one spot, things start to happen. If you don't think so, go to Las Vegas. Things are happening in Las Vegas, lots of things. Some of them that we might not think are so good. Well, this is exactly what was going on in this little strip of land called Corinth. They would take ships from the Adriatic and from the Aegean and drag them across the land in both directions, because it saved a 700-mile trip around the Cape of the landmass, which was an extremely dangerous trip. It's just like going around Cape Horn in Africa. They dug the Panama Canal to eliminate some of those journeys. The trip around the tip of South America that's why the Panama Canal exists, because it's so dangerous to travel it. Well, think about these days. They don't have any kind of radar, GPS, weather forecast, or anything else. They're just in these little wooden boats. And to travel this 700 miles around the Cape, it was said of the journey, this was a seafaring saying at the time, if you're going around Cape Malaya, write out your will. That's what people just figured, you're not going to survive it. So Corinth became this hub, and when a place becomes a hub, people see all kinds of opportunities to make money in ways that aren't savory. Corinth was like that. As a matter of fact, if someone wanted to say something about you or me, and they wanted to say something bad about us, they would say, you're playing the Corinthian. Now that came about because in Greek plays, anytime a person portrayed someone from Corinth in a Greek play, they portrayed them as drunk, always. Because they just figured everybody in Corinth is drunk. There was a temple for Aphrodite up on the Acropolis, the little rise in the land. And every night, 7 days a week, 1,000 prostitutes, 1,000 Aphrodisian priestesses would come down into the city. Another saying about Corinth was, not every man can afford a trip to Corinth. I'll leave it to your imagination to understand what that's speaking about, what that means. So you've got this place with all of this going on. We think, and I guess you could look around our culture and say there's lots of immorality in it, but it is nothing compared to the ancient world. We just don't have a clue. We're all stirred and foamed about all kinds of moral questions. We've got huge ministries that do nothing but highlight immorality, and then as long as we'll send a check, they'll help us to conquer this immorality in our country. And I'm not saying any of that's all bad. I'm just saying it's baby food compared to the ancient world. A good study of the ancient world is a healthy thing when you see the things that were going on here that were just accepted. Pederasty was acceptable. As a matter of fact, if you didn't have, as a grown Greek or Roman man of wealth, a little boyfriend, there was something wrong with you. There are writings in Aristotle where Aristotle writes about the relationship between a grown man and a little boy and feels sorry for the grown man. So we don't have a clue what morality is really like. And we're a very moral country by comparison. Let me just put it that way. Paul was a skenopoioi. Skenopoioi, that is a tent maker. And so he hooks up with Priscilla and Aquila as tent makers. And that word tent maker is a little bit shaky, because tents, to say they made tents only is a part of this occupation. They also worked with leather, which was part of the tents. And Paul comes from Tarsus. In Tarsus, they raised a certain species of goat, and that goat produced a fleece that was very useful in making all kinds of fabrics, part of the fabric portion of tents, draperies, curtains, and all kinds of things. So it makes sense that Paul would have this side occupation. The side occupation, though, for Paul is critical to Paul's life, which we don't quite capture in the Bible. No rabbi could not have a trade. You could not be a Jewish rabbi and not have a trade. They expected you to have some trade. And so Paul's trade is this tent making, the leather worker. But then Timothy and Silas come to Corinth, and all of a sudden the text says, and Paul devoted himself to full-time preaching. It is thought that they brought something of a gift from the church in Philippi where they had left, and they brought it with them to this place, such that it set Paul free to just go about preaching all the time. Paul has a vision in this particular setting as well, and this vision's a very different one for the last one. The last vision said, go to Macedonia, go to Greece and preach. This vision says, stop being afraid. Now, why would God say something like that to Paul? Stop being afraid. I'm going to say because he is afraid. Now that says something to me. I mean, as a Christian, we're sitting in this room today. We all say we believe in God. We believe that God is for us. We believe that God protects us. We believe that God helps us. I agree with all that. But who's going to say that they're never afraid? And Paul was afraid. What's he afraid of? Well, this gets into some of the history of this trip. He goes into the synagogues. He preaches there. Some of the Greeks who have been converted to Judaism believe. Some of the Jews believe. As a matter of fact, it says that the very president of the synagogue becomes a Christian and his whole household. Crispus. But the Jews who have followed Paul all this time, they stir up yet another riot here. And they take Paul before a man named Lucius Junius Gallio Ananias. That's Gallio that you see mentioned here. They take him before this man. This man is a famous man. His brother is Seneca, the Stoic poet from Spain. Seneca wrote of his brother Gallio and said this was the sweetest man that ever lived. Anyone who loved him with their life did not love him enough. And he was known throughout the Roman Empire as being the most fair of all of the governors. He was just completely impartial. So he knows that when these Jews come before him at the Bema seat, where he sits to pronounce judgment on things, that they're trying to manipulate him. They've come there just to stir him up against Paul. And you'll notice it doesn't say much about it, but it says he drove them from the Bema seat. He drove them off the seat of judgment, it says there. Anytime a Roman official came out onto the Bema seat, there were two really big guys standing next to him called lictors. They handled those whips that had the little pieces of metal in the ends of them that they used to scourge Jesus. If you came up on the Bema seat and the governor wanted you off, he would make a way for you to get off. He would entice you to leave the Bema seat by virtue of the lictors who would start swinging those whips. And so that's what he does to these Jews. He just drives them off the Bema seat. Why? Because he says, I don't have any part in this religious question at all. He's just completely impartial. He said, look, if you were doing something wrong, if you were stirring up trouble in Corinth, why, I would listen to you. But there's nothing happening here that I have anything to do with, and he tells them to get out. And so the lictors swing their whips, and all of the Jews are driven off. He knows they're trying just to stir something up. Why is Paul afraid? That's where I want to funnel all this down today. Why is Paul told by God to not be afraid? There is a really good reason for it. You remember Paul just left Athens, and he went before all of these Athenian philosophers who said to Paul, remember the last thing they said to Paul? They said, would you come back? We'd like to hear from you again about this. We'd like to hear this again. And Paul, notice the way he leaves Athens. He just leaves. He doesn't do anything. He doesn't say anything. There's nothing of this moment that's significant except that he leaves. I think it's very significant the way he leaves Athens. And I'll tell you why. If Paul he comes into Athens and it says, the text says he was angered, he was provoked. And he started to argue with the Athenian philosophers gathered at the Agora, the marketplace. When he leaves, he doesn't do any of that. He just leaves. Why? Because the clue is in what the Athenian philosophers ask him to do. Come back again, Paul, and talk to us again about this. We'd love to hear this. In other words, come back and entertain us one more time. They don't care about the gospel. They don't care about salvation. They don't care about Jesus. They don't care about God. They don't care about any of that. What they care about is they want somebody to come back and entertain them one more time. I want to say that that's the picture of North American Christianity today in our culture. The Athenian philosophers are exactly like North American Christians in our culture. Come back and entertain us one more time. You know, the band is really good. Let's have a band next week and a better band. I have a friend, and I've shared this with you before, youth pastor friend that I eat lunch with frequently. And he says the biggest frustration he has is, what do you do next week? He said, I can get them to come for a ski trip. All of them show up for that. Free ski trip, and the parents can send all the teenagers off for a weekend. Heck yeah, let's bring it on. But then the next week, when they're just coming to youth group, half of them show up. Why? He said, I feel like I've got to 1 week, I've got to speak to them, but I got to have a rock and roll band with me in order to get their attention. The next week, when I speak to them, I've got to speak to them while I balance on a beach ball. And they'll watch that. The next week after that, while I'm balanced on the beach ball, I've got to juggle flaming bowling pins. The next week, I've got to juggle chainsaws that are running. I mean, every week he feels like he's got to ramp up this show so that they will come. That's the Athenian philosopher. Paul, would you come back one more time and we'd love to hear this again. Now, in North American Christianity, that's the church. Turn on your radio sometime to the Christian AFR. I remember I used to come back from Sunday night services, and I would turn on to hear Ravi Zacharias. And sometimes we'd get out late, and Ravi was over, and I would hear the announcement for the radio show that came on after Ravi. And you'd hear all these people clapping and cheering, and this music in the background, and this was the announcer's pitch. Come with us and have a worship experience with us this evening. And it was all to do with, the musical presentation and everything like that. And I thought to myself, that's kind of cranky. A worship experience? In other words, come for the entertainment one more time. And we'll make it better than it was last week. I used to meet with a couple, 2 couples. One of them, I was meeting with both of them on account of marriage. And to try to help out. I was assigned to them by the church elders. They said, Rip, we want you to meet with this one and this one, long haul. I said, fine. One of them came to the meeting always there waiting for me. We were meeting at 6:30 in the morning. And they were always there waiting for me, standing in the door of this restaurant where we would meet every Tuesday morning, always waiting for me. And I met with him and his wife several times, met with him every Tuesday morning, and I can tell you, there were so many of those instances where it was just, God does stuff and it's always exciting and amazing. I would say something to him that I wasn't even thinking was important. And here we are in this restaurant, and this man would just break down into tears. Something God was saying to him through what I had said broke his heart. And his relationship with his wife was totally restored, but there was a feature about it that said something of a very practical nature that speaks to where we are right now and these Athenian philosophers. He was digging in to what was happening. He was there, and when he was there, he was engaged in the process. Another couple I met with, just the opposite. I never got to that restaurant. I was supposed to be there at 6:30. When the guy didn't come in anywhere from 6:45 to 7:30 if he showed up. And he always came in blasting through the doors of the restaurant with leaves streaming in behind him. Oh, today I went out in my car and I got halfway here and realized I left my notebook. I got halfway out the door and I realized I didn't brush my teeth. I got partway to the door and I realized I needed to go back and do something in the kitchen. Every time there was a reason why he could not be there on time or at all. And there were good reasons. They were good. It made sense. The car, I had a flat tire, whatever. Every time there was a reason. And pretty soon, I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but I realized every time there's a reason, no, there's something else going on here. That marriage failed. Now, why did those 2 stories tie into these Athenian philosophers? These Athenian philosophers are just like the second person. In other words, as long as it's fun and as long as it's really entertaining, I'm going to dig in and participate. But if it's not, what are you going to show me next week? I talk to people. You have talked to them. Maybe we have somebody in here today, I don't know, who will say to me or say to you, you know, this church thing, my relationship with the Lord right now is so dry. I just don't feel anything. I don't feel like God is listening to me. I don't feel like... And so you start to ask some questions about that. And you say, well, how's it going for you in your church life? Well, you know, I haven't been in, 6 or 8 weeks now. I don't remember the last time we went. I go, okay. Or we get the picture of somebody that just shows up all the time, but isn't engaged in what's going on. I mean, I used to sit here and in other places as well, Sunday school. Somebody prepares a Sunday school lesson. Now look, this is all we got. Here it is. You know, these from cover to cover, that's what we've got. And so how many ways can somebody steer the story of Joshua and Jericho around to make it like juggling the flaming bowling pins, right? It's hard. So when somebody takes the trouble, and I'm sitting out there where you are, and they've taken the trouble to prepare a Sunday school class, one thing's for certain. I don't want to just sit there. I want to raise my hand. I want to ask questions. I want to comment because I know that the only way something I'm going to get out of it is because I put something in it. That's the only way that's going to happen. That's the way it is in a relationship with God too. I mean, He is perfectly content. If you and I will say, well, you know, none of this matters to me right now, and we just will step aside of all of the elements in which we found ourselves dug in, well, God will step aside too and just say, okay, if that's how you want it to be, then that's fine. I'm not going to make you or me do anything. You know, we're just saying all these songs about liberty and freedom. God is the ultimate libertine. He only responds to us when we come. He doesn't respond to us when we dismiss Him. The Athenian philosophers were dismissive of all of this. They just said, come back, Paul, and talk to us about this very interesting thing again, will you? Not because they wanted to become close to God or born again. They did it because they wanted to be entertained. Now, I want to say something here. Maybe you've never considered this. I've been sitting where you are for most of my life. And I've sat there and heard someone from the pulpit say to me, just think, when Jesus comes back and we go to heaven, we get to do this all the time. And I'm thinking, that is the worst advertisement for heaven I have ever heard. Is it not? I mean, you're sitting here today, I'm droning on, you're listening. Do you want to do this 24/7 forever? I don't. I don't want to do this 24/7 forever. That doesn't seem like a good picture of an advertisement for come to Jesus and become born again. The Bible says, no eye has seen, no ear has heard, nor has it entered in anybody's mind what heaven is going to be like. I'm good with that. But Jesus spoke about, He told a parable about the sower, and He said there is a power that this world has, that Satan has, wherein the gospel itself can be snatched away. He said, people will hear the word, and I'll quote it. He said, what was sown among the thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the cares of this world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word out, and this one becomes unfruitful. Now, you take any relationship, I don't care what it is, a marriage relationship, a friendship, a sibling relationship, and don't participate in it. I have friends in Pennsylvania who I sat in a truck with 100 and something days a year for hours and hours and hours, and we were as close as family. There's only one of them that I speak with on a regular basis now. I don't have a close relationship with them. And I'll tell you something else too. Within a marriage, you can have ships passing in the night in a household, and there's no relationship there either. It takes an investment in a relationship to make a relationship a relationship. Jesus said it well. All of these things come and they choke the word out, and the person becomes unfruitful. I don't want to be unfruitful, do you? I want this life to be everything God means it to be. I want to invest in the things that God would call me to invest in with my time and energy and my mental capacities and pour myself in. That's what God wants for all of us. So, when we come to a place and we find the things of God far less interesting to us than the things out there, I'm going to say the problem is not anything that God offers. It's how much we've invested in Him. That's the problem. In a Sunday school, in a church, in anything to do with God, a hungry person is going to participate. Do we come to this, as Max Lucado says, do we come hungry? I can't answer that for anybody. I don't know where everybody is today. If there's anything I said about which you've got